Willie, it's good to have you here today.
Thank you.
Yeah. He visited the Kids Connection earlier, and what'd they ask you?
They wanted to
Here,
know.
come. It's better here.
You'd think that I'd have a mic just plastered in my hair somewhere from all the speaking I do. They wanted to know what dynasty meant, so I told them that it was family. You know, it starts with your generations past, your grandpa and your dad, and it gets passed to you, and you better be ready when you pass it to the next generation. And the dynasty kind of starts with God, though, doesn't it, and Jesus?
Good job. So, like the church family.
The church family.
Now, what is the Duck Dynasty's favorite church?
Well, it's Rocketine Road Church of Christ, of course.
And I hate to ask this, Cody. I mean, Willie. But who's Duck Dynasty's favorite preacher?
Denny Cruz.
All right. Thank you, Willie. Don't spend that dollar all in one place. That's all. I showed him a 20 and gave him a 1. No, that's a husband for you. A cowboy named Bud was overseeing his herd in a remote mountainous pasture in Montana when suddenly a brand new BMW advanced toward him out of a cloud of dust. The driver, a young man in Brioni suit, Gucci shoes, Ray-Ban sunglasses, and YSL tie, leaned out the window and asked the cowboy, "If I tell you exactly how many cows and calves you have in your herd, will you give me a calf?" Bud looks at the man, who obviously is a yuppie, then looks at his peacefully grazing herd and calmly answers, "Sure, why not?" The yuppie parks his car, whips out his Dell notebook computer, connects to his singular Razr V3 cell phone, and surfs to the NASA page on the internet, where he calls up a GPS satellite to get an exact fix, and then he feeds it to another NASA satellite that scans the area in ultra-high resolution. He opens a digital photo in Adobe Photoshop and exports an image to a processing facility in Hamburg, Germany. Within seconds, he receives an email on his Palm Pilot that the image has been processed and the data stored. He then accesses an MS SQL database to an ODBC-connected Excel spreadsheet with email on his BlackBerry, and after a few minutes, he receives a response. Finally, he prints out a full-color, 150-page report on his high-tech miniaturized HP LaserJet printer, turns to the cowboy and says, "You have exactly 1,586 cows and calves." "That's right. Well, I guess you can take one of my calves," said Bud. He watches the young man select one of the animals and looks on with amusement as the young man stuffs it into the trunk of his car. Then Bud says to the young man, "Hey, if I can tell you exactly what your business is, will you give me back my calf?" The young man thinks about it for a second and says, "Okay, why not?" "You're a congressman for the U.S. government," says Bud. "Wow, that's correct," says the yuppie, "but how did you guess?" "No guessing," answered the cowboy. "You showed up here even though nobody called you. You want to get paid for an answer I already knew to a question I never asked. You used millions of dollars worth of equipment trying to show me how much smarter than me you are, and you don't know a thing about how working people make a living, or about cows for that matter. This is a herd of sheep. Now give me back my dog." And that, folks, is what the problem is all about. I just couldn't pass that up. You may have seen that circulating on the internet. It's good to be back. I hope I can make it through this hour. And Ty, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate your stepping up. And I heard so many great things from the lesson and your study. Are you happy? What makes you happy? That changes from time to time, doesn't it? I think if you spend every day with Jesus, and by the way, let's say, "Good morning, Lord," because if you're spending every day with Jesus, I think you'll get happy pretty quick. Can you imagine being around Jesus and not being happy? I suppose you'd have to work at it. You'd have to really work at it. But if you have a sense of his presence, then I think that you would be in a state of deep joy, even though there may be some unhappy events. I think it's time to be joyful. It really is. And if you're not joyful, you might really look at your faith. And if you're not joyful, you might really look closely at your relationship with the one who is the source of joy. What brings you great joy, such that you can say, I have no greater joy than this? What brought the Apostle John no greater joy? What was his no greater joy? It may be surprising. It's found in 3 John verse 4. He said, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in the truth. Now think about that for a minute. It doesn't mean that you're not happy that you won the lottery. It doesn't mean you didn't want the promotion and it made you joyful for a while, or the new house, or the clean yard, or the... So, you know, Carol's just happy if the dirty dishes, I put them back in the sink or something, you know. It doesn't mean that there aren't some things that don't make you joyful, but he says, I have no greater joy. So that means of all the things that make you happy, I want us to compare what our no greater joy is with John's no greater joy. And he says, there's just nothing in all the things that make me happy in this world. And God's given us a wonderful world and so many blessings. Amen? But there is nothing that John says brings him any greater joy. He said, I have no greater joy. Nothing goes over the top of this. And what is it? To hear that my children walk in the truth. Now, he's referring to his children, meaning he was now the aged Apostle John, and he's had a lot of people that he's converted as an apostle. Jesus sent him into all the world, and he went into his part of the world in the Ephesian theater. He was very successful, and he hears reports back. Perhaps he's in exile or getting ready to go in exile on the Isle of Patmos. You know, the apostles were chased around, so sometimes they were driven out of a city, but he gets to hear back about how people are doing over there, where he met them and looked into their faces and shared Jesus with them. And he's saying, you know, life's pretty good, but there is no greater joy in my heart than to hear that my children walk in the truth. Now let's back up a couple of verses and look at this in context. You may remember one of these verses we looked at a few weeks ago when we had the handkerchief, and we used this first verse. Beloved, I wish above all things that you may prosper and be in health. But here's the rest of it. Even as thy soul prospereth. For I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that's in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. He's addressing this to my dear friend Gaius. Do you get happy when your friends are happy? Can you just live on somebody else's joy sometimes? We've had some newlyweds. We've got some other newlyweds coming along. They're going to be married. And doesn't it make you happy that they're happy? I mean, Kasha and Jeremiah got married here September 7th. And when I look at them, I just think, their happiness gives me so much joy. It just makes me happy. We're all living vicariously through their happiness, and we just wish them more and more of that happiness. That's the picture of the church. That you may be happy about a lot of things, but there's no greater joy than somebody else's happiness. Can you get your head around that? I'm so selfish, it's kind of hard, but I'm working on it. John was an apostle, and he said, no greater joy than knowing that my friends, the people that are in the church, are walking in the truth, that they prosper in their soul. Just nothing makes me feel better than that. Have you ever stopped to think that real joy is connected to relationships? I was looking back at my time in Ohio. Carol and I were there at the church, and our time at the Liberty Church, and our time in Independence, and our time even here through the years. And there's been a lot of things that have happened. There have been quilts that have been given. There have been gifts and words of encouragement. There's been support. But our greatest joy is the people that we have come to know in each of the places that we've lived. Have you experienced that? When you think back about where you lived, do you think about the nice kitchen you had there? Well, it wasn't a nice kitchen. It was an old Pentecostal building with sawdust floors that they'd put in some floors, but the kitchen wasn't very good. Didn't even have a dishwasher. Well, it had one on 2 legs. But do you think back about how wonderful the yard was? How nice the golf course was that you played there? All the sports that you were involved. You think about those things, but where is the deep, lasting joy? Are you beginning to see that John had his head on straight? That there is no greater joy than that which is connected to relationships. And if the church, as we as a body could understand this, I was thinking, what makes me happy? Well, it changed. When I was a kid, there were 2 times of the year that I looked forward to most. What would you guess they were? Bingo. Birthday and Christmas. And fortunately, one fell in July and the other in, well, you know. And I just live for those times, you know. And you know why? How many of you think it was about relationships? You know, it was about BB guns and huckleberry cobbler and butterscotch cake with butterscotch icing. You know, because we got to get whatever we want for our birthday. And those were days were all about me. You know, through the years, I've cared less about birthdays, but Christmas is still pretty special, but for a different reason. Right? And what's the reason? It's the relationships. It's when things slow down, and you don't care if you get a pair of socks or a regift. You know, you're getting together, and it's about the relationships. You've matured. You've grown up. And sometimes churches are immature. They don't understand that it's not about them individually, that it's about the church as a whole. It's about everyone else. Look around you right now. Just go ahead. Turn around. Turn around. Let me see the back of your head for a minute. Just look around you. Look who's here. You know, can you say with the Apostle John, there's a lot of things that make me happy, but nothing gives me any greater joy than to know that Alan is well in his soul and he walks in the truth. How do you get to that point where you look at each other that way? Isn't this really the heart of the Lord? Isn't this really the heart of Jesus? When I became a man, Paul says, I put away childish things. We as parents understand the joy in the success and happiness of others. We pray for them. When they're sick, we want desperately for them to get well. We would trade places with them. That's how much their joy is attached to ours. And it's always been this way. Maybe even more so with grandparents, because there's no history there. It's just, here's this wonderful grandchild. You know, I've been studying a little bit about our history here in Newton County. I'm a 7th generation here in Newton County. We're hard to get rid of. We're not very successful, but we're pernicious. James is here. He's 8th generation, Newton County. And there was a man, my great-great-great-grandfather, 4 times. His name was George Joy. And I have no greater joy than great-great-great-great-grandpa George. He was born 2 years after George Washington closed the Revolutionary War. He was born 6 years before our country had a constitution. Some people are questioning whether we have one now. But he came to Missouri. He was a frontiersperson. He served in the Tennessee Volunteers, born in South Carolina, fought in the War of 1812. And he was a frontier person. He really was. He kept pushing the boundaries of this country. Here are some pictures of what they might have looked like. There are no surviving pictures, but this is from Burnett County, Texas, in the 1840s and 50s. He came to Newton County in 1837. And he decided that the climate was kind of miserable, some of his letters say. And they went down to Texas. Some of you are getting ready to do that here in a little while, aren't you? I call you snowbirds. And he left his daughter-in-law, who was married to his son Porter, here in Newton County. When he was here in Newton County, he founded the Cumberland, I think it's a branch of Presbyterian Church, and he was elected the ruling elder in that. The description of him is that he was 6 foot tall, weighed 180, had light hair and blue eyes. And from his positions in the church and in the government in Texas, he was county clerk, first elected, and justice of the peace there when that county first began. He was probably kind of an intelligent guy for his time and fairly well educated. But that's not the point. Here's the point. That's the context. We have 2 letters that have survived that George wrote back to his daughter-in-law here in Newton County. And I want to excerpt some of these and see if you don't hear this same idea of where the real joy is in the Joy family. Dearest children, John said, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children. We received your kind letters bearing date March 1st, 1853, which gave us great satisfaction to hear that you were as well as you were and enjoying good health. Think about leaving that cold and dreary region for a more mild climate. Come on, bring the grandkids down here. Some of you are working that right now. We are getting quite old and feeble. Now, when he left Missouri, he was 60 years old. And he's been down in Texas now for 11 years when he writes this letter. So he's around 71, and he says he's getting quite old and feeble. I have to tell you, he lived to be 98. I'm not going to listen to any of your complaints. But he says, I have not enjoyed better health for the last 15 or 20. As to your mother, she's as well as could be expected for her age. I have good grounds to say this is the healthiest clime I have ever lived in while I sit here and write. I am fanned by cool sea breezes. Look out my door and see their tall mountains, towering, clothed with green grass and verdure, pregnated with marble and granite, while languid brook trickles by with its cooling stream. I'm going right now. See, what more shall we say? We will not multiply words we have so often given about these parts. And then he goes on to say, but the atmosphere sure is nice. But these things, he says, are transient and passing things of a moment. And when you speak, dear Julia, about the growing children and the health of your family, we feel rejoicing with you. It is consoling to see children in grateful glee around us. And I see every day thanksgiving, and I give it to the great and good God for his mercy and kindness to our fallen race. Now, Julia didn't want to go down there because she didn't think there were very good religious prospects. She liked the New Salem, Cumberland that her father-in-law had founded. We trust, at least some of us, that our prospects are good, he writes, and our hopes are bright for immortal glory. We have Methodists, Baptists, Episcopalians, Catholics, Carmelites, that's you, and Presbyterians and Cumberlands, all preaching here in the vicinity. There are 15 of Cumberland's whole prayer meeting every Sabbath, and we may rely on it in our cabin. Second letter, dated April 4th, 1854. Dear daughter and her 2 little children, once more I gladly embrace this opportunity of writing to you to inform you we are all enjoying reasonable health, for which we are thankful to the great giver of all of our blessings, both spiritual and temporal. I think he was Church of Christ. We trust if these lines come to your hand, they may find you all enjoying like blessings. We so often try to remember you on the throne of grace, and we ask your prayers, for we feel we are near our journey's end. 26 more years. May God help us all to live more prayerful, as it is our reasonable duty that we owe to God. We received your letters telling us you were all enjoying good health, for which we're thankful to God. Oh, let us join our voices together in praise to the good Lord. And then he goes on to talk about the lust for gold down there and the effect it was having on some of his boys. He said, we're tired of living in town, so we got a small farm in hopes our boys would return. Time would fail me to tell you about these wild boys, but like all the rest of the people of the 19th century, see, he was an 18th century birth, they're risking their lives and their health for money. Isn't that funny? These 19th century people are so bad. Hence the need to cry mightily to him who is able to save both soul and body. Shadrach is talking about going to California for gold with Plummer, but we will say to him he had best steady himself and prepare for death, which must and will soon come later, and may God help each of us to be prepared for that hour. We have wild boys here. We can't control. All we can do is give them advice and tell them what's right and what is wrong. And it's a matter of joy with us when we see them doing the right. Sounds like John. It's a matter of joy. No greater joy than when my children are walking in the truth. Let us put our trust in God and so to live as we may oft wished we had when we come to die, is my prayer for Christ's sake. Now we will bring our letter to a close, so farewell, George and Martha Joy, to Julian Joy and children. Isn't it amazing? We know how this works. We know that there are some people so dear to our hearts that it breaks our hearts when they are ill. It breaks our hearts when they're in trouble. It enlivens our hearts when they are well, and it enlivens our heart when they're doing the right thing. We understand this. When I was going to Ukraine in 1994, we had about 135 baptisms, and I had a small class of about 10, mostly ladies. And when I came back after those 10 days, I was dreaming every night, and I could see these ladies in the group with their faces radiant, their scarves on, their print dresses. They walked 2 miles to class. They would go back home for lunch, walk 2 miles back. They did this 2 or 3 times a day to be a part of the morning, afternoon, and evening service. And they became Christians. They read their Bibles for the first time. They got their glasses because they couldn't see. They said, we're like students again. We're in the first grade. And I dreamed about them. And I said, I just have to go back, because whatever I had here was not as important as their spiritual well-being there. This is what John is feeling. He's saying, I know you. I've worked with you. I'm not with you right now, but I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in the truth. Look around again. Do you feel that way about the people here? When I was in Ukraine, I was struck with the fact of how much hugging people do. And so I began to hug people and hug back, right? You remember that? And those of you who were there. And so I told Carol once, I said, you know, when I come to Neosho, I say, how are you? Fine, fine. I said, I'm going to start hugging people. I mean, that's one way. You know, a handshake is for those who don't know how to hug. And they taught me how to hug. They showed me this pure, unadulterated love of the Lord that filled their hearts and spilled out to me, who had a small part, and others of you, in bringing a Bible to them or the gospel. And there's no deeper joy than that. And so some of you may remember when I started hugging people around here. You may have thought that I was temporarily insane or something. And I just think it's something that's so valuable to us. The Bible says, salute one another with a holy kiss. There shouldn't be that distance, that arm's length. We should look at one another and say, I have no greater joy than your happiness, Cletus, Carolyn, that your spiritual condition. And I think the reason we think this way is because it's God's way for us. I have to say a good word about our friend and elder Ken Cope. I've known a lot of people in these 61 years, but I've never known anyone who so genuinely, so consistently expressed his great joy at other people's good fortune. I think that it could be written when our lives are all over, certainly concerning Ken, these words, that's great. Have you heard him say it? You tell him a story about somebody else that's having success, somebody else that's doing something, he will say, that's great. I've never known a person, Ken, and I applaud you for this, with such no guile, just a total acceptance of the good fortune and the success of others. And that's why you're loved and why you've been successful. We should applaud that attitude. I've learned a lot in watching you respond to things that sometimes even were hurtful to us as a church. You were so big-hearted that you would look at that situation for that person and say, that's great. Well, God bless them. Can we have a heart like that? Can we grow so close to the Lord, so much like the Apostle John, that we can say, there's no greater joy than to know people are in the right. And I'll tell you why this is important. This is why it's important. It's what George Joyce said in the letter. We need to steady ourselves, because there's going to come a time in all of our lives, and this is what the Apostle John knew, it's what Ken knows, it's what we should all know. There's going to come a time in all of our lives when it comes down to just you and God. It won't matter what car you have, what house you live in, even where you worked. how successful you were, how many children you had, what their state is. When you come to the end of life, do you understand? Steady yourself. It's just you and the Lord. And if your relationship with Him is what it should be, that's all that matters. That's all that will have ever mattered. For eons and eternity forward, that's all that will matter. And when you get your mind around that, you begin to see how important it is for everyone to walk in the truth. Because, let me ask you something. What would you take to send me to hell? Is there any amount of money that could be offered to you that would consign, if it were in your power, anyone in this audience to an eternity away from God? What if we said, we can spare Denny throughout an eternity, and I'll give you $1 billion. If it was in your power, would you push the button and take the $1 billion and send me off? Is there anyone in here that you think is so expendable that you would take $10 billion for their soul right now? You see, when you get down to the nitty-gritty, it's what George said. Steady yourself, for there is an hour coming sooner or later when you will get it. You will get it. The Apostle John just got it a little sooner than most of us. He understood the joy of Jesus. He understood what Jesus was feeling when he went to the cross. It talks about it in Hebrews, that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. What was the joy? What he was saying is, my life is not worth one person being lost. I'm willing to give it up. He died for you. He died for me. That was the joy that was set before him. There is no greater joy than knowing that the people you're looking at around here are right with their Lord. And therefore, there is no greater responsibility than encouraging one another to stay in that way. Is there? Is there? Would we do anything that would cast a stumbling block in the way of anyone on their relationship to the Lord? Wouldn't we rather encourage, uplift, love, and hug them along the way to the eternal kingdom? That is a great responsibility and a great privilege we have in the church, to lift up ourselves in the unity and the love of God. For God so loved the world. That's the heart of God, that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. In John 15:10 and 11, Jesus spoke of this joy. If you obey my commands, you remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. And I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. Look around one more time. See how important everyone is to the Lord, and how important their relationship with the Lord is to them personally. And then let that inform your prayers, your thoughts, your words, and your actions. For each one here is loved and valued by the Lord so much that he gave his life. And then he calls us together and says, learn of my love and share that in the body of the fellowship of the church. No wonder Duck Dynasty likes Rocketine Road. We get this. There's nothing more important than unity. My way is not more important than unity. Your way is not more important than unity. There's nothing that we want to do to cause a problem for anyone. In 2 Corinthians 1 and verse 24, I think we could find a motto here where Paul says, I work with you for your joy. That's our job together, to work with each other for our mutual joy that comes from that right relationship with God. In Romans 12 and verse 10, it says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. And we'll close with the words of Jesus in John 13. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Let's stand and sing.